Troy Harriman with Ministry Pacific, and we welcome you to a very important interview that reflects a lot of the challenges of our times. We are joined here by Vaughn Baker, president of Strategos International, a leading security firm, and Vaughn's here to talk to us about the rising tide of church vandalism and some things that maybe churches and ministries can do to protect themselves. So, Vaughn, thank you for joining us today. And before we get into this topic, could you tell us a little bit about ways that Strategos serves churches and ministries?
Yes, we have been serving churches and ministries since 2007, and since starting not only training for on safety and security related topics, but also consulting with them on safety and security related topics, and even providing protection services for them as well. Since we started that, we've served about 1,500 ministries in all 50 states, and actually in some other countries as well. So we've got quite a bit of experience on this topic. And as you know, the world's not getting better, it's getting worse. And so there's an increased need on these topics as well.
Well, the good news is that Strategos is part of the solution to the challenges that churches are experiencing on security fronts. But we're here to talk about the bad news, and that's exemplified by a recent Washington Post article that was written by the Archbishop of Denver, and it's titled "Church Vandalism is Soaring. Here's Why Everyone Should Care." And that was preceded by another article by Axios, another news organization, that pointed out that attacks against churches, particularly church buildings, have surged this year across all religious backgrounds, all, not just Protestant, Catholic, but of all stripes. And they're all experiencing a surge, not only in vandalism, but also in crimes like arson. And so these are strange times in which we're living. Vaughn, does the timing of this surge in vandalism and violence against churches and ministries and their properties, does the timing at all surprise you?
No, it doesn't. Particularly in the last couple of years, the timing doesn't surprise us. We've seen not only a surge in property crimes, but just crime in general against churches and against people, and all sorts of organizations. I know you see, it seems like every day now you're seeing large dollar amounts of losses as far as looting, where tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of products, where somebody will go into a store in gangs and just doing smash and grabs. So in violent events against churches since 1999, we've seen a 2,000% increase. So this surge is not surprising. The question that usually comes up with this, along with it, is it surging? But why is it surging? And we really talk about that. We try to make people understand what we're seeing. And if we analyze this, in the past few years particularly, we're seeing a real antipathy and a real aggression towards organized religion in general, and in any aspect of a civil society. And really, some of the reasons for this, as you know, living in the world that we're living in, we're seeing, and this is a worldview issue, and it's a hard issue. We're seeing this moral relativism and ethical relativism, and that's okay. You can have your own worldview. Everybody's entitled to their own worldview. But what happens is that ends up expanding to extremism. And extremism is defined as anybody who takes act or commits acts of violence based on their worldview. And when you define this moral or ethical relativism as somebody who basically has their own personal worldview, and right and wrong to them is based on their worldview at that moment. Most anybody has the ability to rationalize wrongdoing away. And so anybody who takes a stance on these issues, like organized religion, like somebody who represents law and order, like law enforcement or our justice system, is going to be seen as a target. And some of these topics that create this division is anything related to maybe religious freedom or abortion or racism, topics like self-defense, gender-related topics, same-sex marriage, the capitalism versus socialism, the progressive versus conservative. All these are areas of division, and now it's starting to manifest into extremist acts.
So it sounds like possibility that attitudes of people have gone from a widespread indifference to a more focused opposition in some cases to churches, and that may be leading to some of these acts of violence.
And, it's okay to have an opposing, you say opposition, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Being opposed to a belief system, that's your opinion. But when you look at the opposition as someone who must be defeated, that's where we see some of these acts that get committed against these organizations.
One of the insightful things that I have heard Strategos share over the years is that it's more important to protect people than stuff. So what that means would be, so if someone's running out the door with your offering and a gun, essentially it's better to let the offering go than to lose your life. At the same time, though, churches are responsible to take care of their facilities, their campuses, their vehicles, and they'd be really hard pressed to function in any kind of long-term basis without them. And the vandalism that we're talking about here today isn't just graffiti in the parking lot. It does involve graffiti, but it's been Nazi graffiti, racist graffiti, satanic graffiti, and buildings so trashed that they can't be used for worship services for weeks or months while they're being repaired. So, Vaughn, when it comes to protecting a church from vandalism, what's a church's first line of defense? What are the fundamental things they should think about doing?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Roy. And when we talk about how do we place our priorities on preparedness and response, yeah, we do emphasize protecting people first and then protecting assets. And really, we're talking about being good stewards of what God's blessed us with. And how do we prevent those resources that He's blessed us with from being taken or from being stolen? And it's basically being a good steward, as Matthew 25 talks about in the parable of the talents. How do we take care of what God's blessed us with? But it's important to understand why criminals commit crimes and where they commit these crimes at. They commit crimes based on intent. I want to do this, and also based on the opportunity to successfully achieve the successful commission of that crime. So what we're trying to create is both layers of awareness and layers of protection. Now, we talk about layers of awareness, we can't respond to something or prevent something that we're not aware of. So some of the ideas of layers of awareness would be our camera systems, our CCTV surveillance systems. Layers of awareness, another example would be lighting, how we put lighting in place, artificial lighting, especially during hours of darkness or areas of darkness. And then motion sensors and becoming aware of things that are occurring that way. Some of the examples of prevention, we talk about layers of awareness, but also layers of prevention. Gates into our parking lots to prevent an intruder from getting close access to your building. Remember, they tried to commit these crimes based on their ability to escape. But if their vehicle is 200 yards away and the police show up, now they've got to run to their vehicle because they weren't able to pull it right next to the door because we had vehicle gates up. Locks for our buildings would be another example. Impact resistant or ballistic resistant window film to prevent access. And then, of course, many other areas of access control from a physical security point, strategies that we can put in place.
So, Vaughn, as I've read news reports about many of these acts of vandalism, and they're happening every single day in the United States, it's clear that what many of these churches have done is they just lock the door and hope for the best. If you could only do one or two things, three things at the most, and your budget was really limited, where should you start?
I think if we're going to prioritize again, awareness is the highest priority. Usually people default, well, we got to get cameras. Well, it depends. The first thing we got to determine is what are we going to use the cameras for? Are we going to use them, understanding that cameras themselves don't make you safer? We need to understand, are we going to use them to become aware? Are we going to monitor them in real time? Or are they going to be, in some cases, cameras are a deterrent as well. So really, when we prioritize, one of the best ways that you can deter crime is the right lighting and motion censored lighting. Because lights to a bad guy are like holy water to a vampire. They avoid it, they avoid light, or they move away from light. So lighting and motion security alarms is probably our first priority, and then we go to cameras after that.
Those are real commonsensical things, but often not done. But yeah, an area that's flooded with light is definitely a deterrent. And I really like the gates idea. That's one that hasn't we haven't really talked about previous to this discussion is just making it anything to make it more impractical to get there. And even if someone doesn't have evil intent, you don't want people hanging out in your parking lot when no one's there and there's nothing going on. Nothing good can come from that.
The other benefits of vehicle gates is if people get hurt when they're on your property, now it's a liability issue. So preventing access to your property, period, so they don't get hurt or become even a victim of crime on your property, you can still be sued.
Another excellent point with alarms, again, like with cameras, there are multiple levels. But is it possible that even if you simply have an alarm that just makes a loud noise, that could in and of itself be at least a basic or preliminary deterrent, because all of a sudden attention is being drawn to somebody who doesn't want attention?
Absolutely. And of course, just an alarm to get the police there used to be a really good strategy, but we want to have bright flashing lights and loud sirens that are associated with these alarms. Sorry to say, police resources are more taxed now than they have been in 30 or 40 years. So there is going to be a delayed response on law enforcement response. So in the meantime, we want to attract as much attention as you say. So not only that, but the notification piece, we need to have a cell phone backup or a Wi-Fi backup in case the phone lines get cut for notification to the alarm company as well. So that's something else to consider as far as security alarms are concerned.
And that's an excellent point, that we really have to have ownership in our security, though the police are valuable partners. What role, Vaughn, can your local police department play in being an ally, and maybe what kind of communication needs to occur for a profitable partnership to happen?
Well, the first thing is understanding their limitations. And the primary limitation to on-duty law enforcement is the time it takes to be able to respond, whether it's an in-progress violent event or an alarm call, things of that nature. So we need to understand where they can be beneficial. One of the biggest areas they can be beneficial is partnering with them. Most law enforcement agencies have a crime prevention department or crime prevention agency, and they have officers or personnel that's assigned to that, so they can provide you with consulting strategies to assist in preventing crime from occurring, whether it be the vandalisms, the arsons, the property crimes, or the crimes against persons. So being able to partner with them, also educating them on what on-scene resources you are employing, particularly if you're having armed security, they're going to want to know this. So being able to partner with them in those areas as well is very important.
Well, and Strategos is well known and has a legacy of training volunteer security teams at churches and nonprofits. Now, we're just here talking about buildings today, but is there any correlation between churches that have an organized and well-trained volunteer security team and the prevention of vandalism?
There is, and the reason there is, and this is prevention of crime in general, is because we've overcome the big D, this idea of denial, the idea that it can't happen here. So just the awareness that is associated with trained people that are trained, whether it's a security ministry volunteer or whether it's a staff member or a children's volunteer, teaching them what awareness looks like can significantly improve our goals of reduction of crime in general, but also vandalism. So there is a significant correlation between those two.
Simply, people are more aware of what's going on. And I know this was an issue when the lockdown situation was a lot more intense, where buildings were left unoccupied. But churches that had security teams, some of them went out and just walk the building every once in a while and just make sure that everything was in legitimate shape. So as I look at reports, I often see that a church does have an alarm system. An alarm sounds, the person who receives the notification is the pastor. The pastor goes to the building alone to respond to whatever has happened. Is this the best approach?
I can give you dozens of news reports and stories that have occurred where somebody went by themselves to a notification of alarm afterwards and something bad has happened, whether that person became a victim or whether they had to defend them. They put themselves in a situation where they had to defend themselves and somebody else lost their life as a result. So we recommend, if you're going to have after hours response to alarm calls where crime could be occurring, that you do this in the form of pairs or the buddy system, having more than one person there with you. Understand that you may need to go ahead and turn that alarm off or go into the building prior to law enforcement getting there, particularly if you're in an urban area where law enforcement response could take quite some time. But doing that via the buddy system, and doing that, if you're going to do that, we also recommend you be trained as well. And so you don't put yourself in a bad position, and you have a significant opportunity to de-escalate an event versus having an event escalate where you might have to be a victim or have to victimize somebody else.
Yeah, it is interesting. Most people would think significantly before they ran into a burning building and would defer to a firefighter. But I don't know if it's something about, men and our bravado, we can handle this. I don't know what it is, but no, excellent point. Bring someone else, or should someone who's a layperson in security, like a pastor, should they just completely defer to the police and wait for the police response, however late that may be?
Yeah, and sometimes there's an assumption, even if they see forced entry on a building, there's assumption that the intruder is gone already. Well, I can go ahead and go in. Surely he's gone by now. It's been 45 minutes. It may not be the case. So there's instances where somebody's broken into a building for food, and maybe they fell asleep or they passed out because they're under the influence and they're still in there. So there's nothing wrong with going ahead and wait until law enforcement gets there. You can never go wrong that way. Robbery is actually the number one statistic as far as violent events that occurred at churches. What are the motivations? Robbery is the number one. About 23% of the time, it's robbery is the motive. So, and that's where somebody's using force to take an asset of somebody else or to victimize somebody else.
Excellent insight. And so many churches would be so much better off in terms of protecting their campuses and their people if they can apply even just a third of some of the things that we're talking about here today. One of those, by the way, and the reason we're talking about it as being an insurance broker for about 1,200 churches in mostly the Western United States. On the insurance side, one thing that's important is that churches are able to obtain from their insurance what they think they're going to obtain. So, for example, though they have property coverage, the other question that can come up is, are the things inside their building that aren't nailed down, are those covered? Are those protected? So you could have a soundboard that's thousands of dollars that when it could be stolen, or just in the mindless attitude of vandalism, someone pour paint all over that. There's a lot of things that honestly we can't afford to have destroyed. And that's what insurance is there for. It's for the things that we hope won't happen, in the same way, in a similar way that our security force, our security team, it's there. We hope that they don't ever have to tackle someone or call the police, but it brings peace of mind and it keeps continuity because they're there.
And like you said, Roy, insurance is another way of showing stewardship. And for those things that we're not going to be able to replace because it's high dollar items and we've bought them over time, an insurance strategy and do an insurance review to make sure those items are covered. Because one of the questions that's going to get asked is, well, prove you owned it. So you need to be able to document that you own those items that are missing as well. So yeah, insurance is a big piece of this strategy of being a good steward of our blessings that God's given us.
Yes, and I know obviously you're not an insurer, but you've been a part of a whole lot of these discussions, integral to it. So we just encourage churches, whether they're an existing client or are not yet a client of us, but they just want to understand this process, ask questions. It's free to do so. And I want to give Vaughn here the last word of insights for churches that are concerned about protecting their property, or of course their parishioners, who are far more important. And then we won't let him off the hook until he tells us the best way to contact him. But Vaughn, what are some of your final thoughts here that we haven't been shared yet today?
Well, one thing, we pray that everything you learned here is a waste of time and it's never needed. But Proverbs 22:3 and Matthew 10:16 says that we're to prepare in advance for those things that are unlikely but high impact events that we could be victims of. So this is just part of that preparation. As far as how people can contact us, they can contact us through our website at strategosintl.com. That's strategosintl.com. Or they can call us on our toll-free number, 888-569-5444.
We'll make sure everybody gets that and that's plastered everywhere. So thank you so much for these insights today. On earth here, we have a couple of actions that we won't have in heaven. In heaven, there won't have to be a security team, and you won't have to have insurance. But we're not there yet, so we have to be ready. So thank you so much, Vaughn.
Okay, thanks, Roy.